Good morning. Thank you for joining us. Bonjour et merci à tous de votre présence ici. I'm Tettey. I'm a director and professor at the Norman Paterson School of International Affairs, also known as NPSIA, here at Carleton University. NPSIA is Canada's oldest and leading school of international affairs. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that Carleton University is situated on the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. It is my pleasure to welcome you to today's conversation with the President of the Republic of Finland, Dr. Alexander Stubb. Mr. President, we are honored to have you with us. We look forward to this morning's conversation about rebalancing the world order in an age of fragmentation. So to set the stage for today's conversation, I should note for our audience that you've recently written an essay in Foreign Affairs as well as a book, The Triangle of Power, Rebalancing a New World Order. In these publications, you have discussed what a new world order might look like, and you've made a call for values-based realism and a key role for the Global South. I will now invite the President and Vice Chancellor of Carleton University, Dr. Wisdom Tettey, to the podium for his welcoming remarks. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Tettey, and Your Excellency's distinguished guest. It's a pleasure to welcome you to Carleton University this morning. And a special welcome to you, Mr. President, for making time in your schedule to join us this morning. As you can see from the audience, there's a lot of excitement, and we're all looking forward to the conversation that we'll hear later on. But I want to start off by saying a couple of things about the relationship between our countries. We, as northern countries, Arctic countries, have something in common that binds us, that we're able to connect on a number of things, from values to mutual security for one another, mutual flourishing for our communities, and this has defined the relationship all these years. And so today's visit is just another manifestation of what it takes to continue to build that relationship, to solidify it, particularly in moments like this, where the fractures of this world are putting a lot of strain on different kinds of relationships. Relationships that have endured for many years are now beginning to frail. But this is one relationship that continues to endure, is solid. Even as you and our Prime Minister get on the ice to duke it out, is still in the spirit of conviviality and mutual understanding of what it takes for us to continue as middle powers to sustain this world, even as challenges continue to surface. Finland and Canada have significant relationships in terms of our populations. We have important international roles to play. And as I indicated, at this moment, it's even more imperative than ever that our countries take a frontline seat in driving us back to a level of stability, sanity, and global partnership that seems to be challenged at this moment. We've worked together in many ways. We do have a youth mobility agreement that allows our youth to engage in one another, immerse themselves in each country's spaces, and ensure that we're living those values and re-energizing ourselves to continue to do the work that is necessary, because we cannot take these values for granted. We cannot take these relationships for granted, as evidenced by what we're going through today. We also do have a strategic foreign and security policy partnership that I'm sure is part of what you've engaged with our political leaders on during your visit. And that gives us some assurance that in spite of everything, there are certain things that are grounded, that binds us, and that'll continue to sustain the relationship over the long term. Carleton is proud to be connected to Finland in different ways. We do have relationships, not just across our higher education sector, but with industry partners as well. We do have significant relationship with Finnish industries, such as Nokia. We have support for our students to engage in learning in environments that are supported and sustained by these organizations. Nokia Canada has hit a significant milestone in our relationship, which is that this year we had the 1,000th co-op placement in that organization. So this, for us, is not a transient relationship, but one that is longstanding and enduring. We've also received support to allow students to be able to access the world-class education that we provide here through scholarships that have been made available so the students would otherwise not be able to avail themselves of that opportunity, are able to do so. And so we're grateful that we're investing not just in transactional relationships, but in relationships that anchor our future. And that is our youth, our young people, as they go through the kind of education that we offer. So these partnerships for me are important, on multiple levels. And I'm looking forward to the conversation this morning as, His Excellency engages with you through, our own, Chancellor's professor, Professor Fen Hampson, who would lead that conversation. So Fen, you channel all of us, all the questions that we have bubbling. We're hoping that you'll be able to give expression to that as you engage with His Excellency. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Fen, to take it away. Thank you also very much.
Well, a very warm welcome, Mr. President, to Ottawa. Is this your first time here?
In my capacity as president, but certainly not the first time. First time I actually visited Canada was in 1981. Students will remember. We're very close friends with Carl Brewer and his family. He actually brought modern ice hockey into Finland to my dad's team called IFK, and I spent the summer here, actually in Ontario, more towards Toronto and the Muskoka Lakes, but spent a lot of time in Canada over the years.
Now, for the benefit of the audience, why are you here? It presumably isn't. It wasn't to play hockey with the Prime Minister last night and the Finnish team.
No, I think the world is going through fairly turbulent times. And as the president of the university noted, that those are the moments when you need friends who have similar values, who have similar interests, and who have a similar capacity to project power. Mark and I have grown quite close over the years. We have a fairly similar background, albeit he's an economist, I'm a political scientist. And
you're better trained than he is. I say that as a political scientist.
I think that's a fight between Oxford and the London School of Economics, so that's sort of just one way of bilateral trying to understand what's going on in the world and how we can impact things. So we had a really nice 2-hour dinner tete-a-tete last night with Mark. But the other thing, the reason we're here is I have 40 companies in tow, from the defense industry, from tech, from mining, from the shipping industry, who have a vested interest to work together with our American friends. So it's kind of one of those moments when...
And Canadian ones, too.
Yeah, that's definitely, the idea being that, we work together, Canada and Finland. And of course, then there was a little bit of hockey. And I have to congratulate Carleton University. I don't know which one stole the emblem of which one. That looks like Team Canada to me. And by the way, I'm not at all crossed at Connor McDavid's last-minute goal in the semifinals in the Olympics. And the penalty that he fished. But other than that, we're good. Other than that, I love Canada.
You've developed a very special relationship with Donald Trump. He's apparently very impressed with your golf game. And when you were talking to our Prime Minister, who's had a few difficult moments, did you suggest he might want to take up golf?
No, but we did keep our elbows down when we played hockey. So.
Well, turning to more serious matters.
You mean hockey is not serious? I'm worried here.
Mr. President, you're a student of history. And, if we go back to the ancient Greeks and Thucydides' account of the Peloponnesian Wars. And for the benefit of students who did not do their reading for my final exam,
Here's the question.
Thucydides was not a Greek golfer. He was a historian who wrote about ancient Greece. And during a period of great power transition, as we saw in Greece, as we've seen really throughout history, small and middle powers, as our Prime Minister likes to say, end up being on the table as lunch as opposed to setting the menu. So what hope do we have now at a time of great power rivalry that things are going to be different?
I actually think that we have a lot of hope. And when you speak about Thucydides, I always look at his trap. And his trap was the idea that when you're a great power in decline, you have to try to salvage what is left. And usually that is ending up in war. We could say that Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine is an example thereof. I think he was also right in saying that this is probably not directly from him, but from someone else, that I think we are between orders right now. We know that the old world order, just like Mark Carney has said, is dead, but we don't know what the next one is going to be like. And then in foreign policy, you quite often have three instruments, and they're values, interests, and power. And us, the smaller guys, we have values. For us, they are liberal values, human rights, fundamental rights, democracy, freedom, the rule of law, international institutions. And then we have interests, and I think Canada and Finland, we connect with that. It's Arctic, it's defense, it's security, the rest of it. But we don't have power, unlike the big players. Now, how do we then project power? The way in which we do it is by coming up with ideas. So if the order is changing, try to take the agenda and suggest, okay, what is it going to be? Mark talks about middle powers. I talk about reforming the existing institutions. So I think we have a lot of agency as long as we take it. We just have to take the space of power that's given to us as small states, because otherwise we end up, with what you refer to. It's sort of the big ones do what they want, and we small ones do what we can, and we have to try to avoid that.
If you look at the combined gross domestic product of Canada, Europe, Japan, Korea, we're actually bigger than the United States.
I think Finland plays a really big role in that one.
And we're bigger than China. We do have market power. We sometimes forget that the United States is heavily indebted to the rest of the world, and we are some of their principal creditors, some 21 trillion.
Yeah.
That should give us leverage, but the problem with small powers and middle powers, and we've seen this in the past year, is a classic collective action problem. Not being able to work together. And everybody thinking they can cut their own deal with, whether it's Washington or Beijing. How do we overcome that?
Well, let me try to look at it from a slightly different angle, and this is probably where my thinking differs a little bit from Mark's, because he talks about middle powers. I talk about international institutions, and the reason I do that is Finland is a member of the European Union, and of course the European Union is not only an internal market, but it has exclusive competence on trade, competition, monetary policy, customs, and many other things. So I feel very well shielded in this different world. I know that, if you read The Economist, they're not going to look at the EU as an entity, but the EU as an economic entity used to be up to par with the United States and bigger than China. Now, of course, it's a little bit smaller. So then the answer becomes that we kind of need to unite in this world, and I think that's what we're seeing. I mean, a lot of people don't understand that. I mean, I heard a really interesting way of saying it. In Europe, we need to reform. So we have what we call the Draghi report, which is great. We have the Letta report. But there are two things that are unifying Europe right now more than the Draghi report and the Letta report. One is security pressure coming from Russia. I've never seen us as united as we have been during this war. I mean, even Hungary now. And then pressure coming from the United States. So we're coming together. And my sort of thinking in all of this is, okay, how do we bring our values-based allies and friends together on this trip? Canada, South Korea, Japan, New Zealand, and Australia. And I think this will kind of happen, if not organically, at least quite naturally, that we start working together. That's why I'm sort of, a little bit miffed. I should have called my book the rectangle of power instead of the triangle of power. But
we actually have a copy here.
You can't have it all. You can't have it all.
Yeah. So, speaking of Europe, and you mentioned Ukraine earlier, putting the U.S. aside, what's Europe's vision for Ukraine? What do you want to see come out of this if and when that conflict ends? And from your country's perspective, what would a sustainable European-led security commitment to Ukraine look like with Canadian support?
Okay. I think there are a few quite big questions there. Let me make the first observation. Was it not for Ukraine, in other words, Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine, Finland and Sweden would not have joined NATO.
Right.
So I think we are indebted to them for the fact that they made us see the reality that we live next to an imperial power, and for us to survive, we need protection in form of NATO. So if you were to ask me for a headline, what would I like to see for Ukraine? And I say this in the long term, and I'm not the one who decides, but I would like to see Ukraine both in the EU and in NATO. Why do I say this? I say it because if you look at things from the perspective of Putin, this operation has been a strategic failure on so many accounts. First of all, he wanted to take over Ukraine, but Ukraine became European and also transatlanticist. Secondly, he wanted to prevent NATO from enlarging, and he ended up getting Finland and Sweden in, including doubling the border of NATO with his country in the form of Finland, which obviously has a defense posture that has been built up ever since the Winter War and the War of Continuation to provide enough deterrence to disinvest Russia's interest in acquiring territory from Finland. And thirdly, he wanted to project Russian global power with his attack on Ukraine. And look at his global power in Cuba, in Venezuela, in Syria, in Iran. It's nowhere to be seen. Right. So in that sense, I think they have fundamentally failed in what they've done. And even if you look at it from a territorial perspective, during World War II, it took 4 years for the Soviet Union to march into Berlin. We're now 4 years into the active war, but actually 13 years or 12 years into the war itself, and they have not even gotten Pokrovsk yet. Right. That's less than 20% of Ukrainian territory. And now, interestingly enough, and sorry for making this long, but just to see how much of a better place Ukraine is in today than they were a year ago. In the past 4 months, and sorry for being morbid, and I know this is rough language, but in the past 4 months, Ukraine has killed or wounded between 30 to 35,000 Russian soldiers per month. They have done so 95% with drones at a ratio of 1 Ukrainian dead to 5 Russians dead. Russia is not de facto anymore acquiring territory. In the past year, in 2025, they acquired less than 1 percentage point of territory in Ukraine, with 400,000 Russian soldiers dead or wounded. So if you extrapolate that and understand that Russia is now advancing at 157 dead to a square kilometer, it would take between 1 to 2 years to acquire Donetsk at a cost of roughly 800,000 dead. So militarily, this is it's a failure for Russia. Now, do I take joy in this? Yes, I do. But that will not necessarily change the strategic thinking and aim of Putin. His aim is still to acquire all of Ukraine. The only thing that will change his mind is a risk to his own regime, and whether that happens from the inside or not, we don't know. Sorry for the long answer.
I'd like to turn to Europe and defense. The Wall Street Journal reported this morning that active discussions underway. You've been intimately involved in them to develop Plan B if and when the President of the United States decides to either reposition or withdraw troops from Europe. Is it realistic to think now, given the fiscal pressures that European countries are under, including your own, high levels of debt, that they're going to be able to pull off what seems to be a very ambitious plan to develop the industrial base, develop a stronger European defense capability, as the French would like. The Germans seem to have changed their position. They're much more supportive of it, as we're reading. Is it going to happen?
I think I have to qualify what I say. Is that I think sometimes in public discourse we see foreign policy, security policy, or defense policy as binary, as black and white. I think the only thing that's binary is the line between war and peace. But even that, in today's hybrid warfare, is somehow blurred. So when we talk about burden shifting, for me, it does not mean American withdrawal from the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. But it means a shift of the burden, which, if you use it figuratively, in today's world is 60-40 US, Europe, and Canada, to 40-60, the other way around. Mm-hmm. And then you start looking at, okay, what does this mean? NATO's deterrence is based on 3 pillars, which are conventional forces, missiles, and nuclear deterrence. And I think what's going to happen is a shift in the conventional forces, which I actually think is called for. So say hypothetically that there's roughly 100,000 American troops. You read the National Defense Strategy of the US and you see that they're going to reduce that number. But as long as that reduction happens in a controlled manner, in a cool, calm, and collected manner, in a planned manner, I think it's okay. We need to increase our own defense expenditure. We need to increase our capabilities. But then we come to missiles and perhaps other capabilities that Europe doesn't have. And I don't want to see those pulled out from Europe on the American side, which might have to do with air defenses, which might have to do with other types of capabilities. And then finally, and I don't think anyone in the US would suggest this, that there would be a withdrawal of the nuclear umbrella. Mm-hmm. And I keep on, when I discuss with my American friends and with President Trump, I tell them the raw fact that when you look at Arctic security, Finland has trained 1 million men and women through obligatory military service and conscription to fight in Arctic conditions. And our border is 100 kilometers away from Murmansk and the Kola Peninsula, where they have nuclear heads, Russians, which are not pointed at Helsinki, Stockholm, or Oslo. They're pointed at New York and Washington, D.C. So then you have to ask yourself the legitimate, I think, military question: is it in the interest of the United States to withdraw from NATO if those nuclear warheads are pointed at them? My answer is no. So, a controlled shift, burden sharing, Fine, you talked about fiscal space. I'm in the lucky position that I only do foreign policy and I'm the commander-in-chief. I don't do money. So I leave that question to the government. We have the Minister of Economy here, so he can probably answer that question. But of course, there's going to be, pressure on a lot of European states. But, give credit also to President Trump in the sense that with his innovative negotiating tactics, he did drive a lot of NATO member states to commit to 5% of defense expenditure. It's not going to be easy for European countries. It's not going to be easy for Canada, but it's something that has to be done in the name of our own security.
And do you think we'll ever reach 5% of GDP? Because in the Canadian case, if you crank the numbers, 5% of gross domestic product is more than the federal government transfers to the provinces in equalization payments, in social benefits. It's much bigger than the price of Medicare. Canada's going to be at a reckoning point. Do we want a national security state, which means dismantling part of the welfare state? And everything that I see in terms of the discussions in Europe, the discussions in France, they're almost already at that position.
Obviously, it's always a balance, but sometimes I feel, and also as former finance minister, that this is not a straightforward accounting exercise between welfare and security. It's probably somewhere in between. And of course, during the Cold War, many European states had defense budgets which were north of 5% of GDP. It's a big ask, I fully admit that. It's not going to be easy, and every country has to find the right balance. The only worry I have is that a country like Finland, which is in the front line, together with the Baltic states, with Poland, obviously with Ukraine and Turkey, that we are not left to carry the burden ourselves, and that we all have to work on this together. So I think the trajectory is the right one in a very difficult situation of constrained fiscal space. Obviously, I'm not going to take issue with the way in which you distribute wealth to the provinces or the way in which you run your healthcare system. But just a gentle reminder, without security, there is no welfare state.
True. I'd like to turn to the issue of defense procurement. I couldn't help noticing that Finland is going to be buying, or is buying, F-35A fighters, some 64 of them. You have a neighbor, if I'm not mistaken, that makes a pretty good fighter called the Gripen. Maybe you could give us a sense of, why you decided to go American as opposed to friendly Swedes.
Well, at the time of the decision, I was in academia, so you're going to have to ask the government who was in power at the time. No, I think if you want to look at the roots of that decision, you have to go back to the end of the Cold War. Finland had limits to its sovereignty as a state during the Cold War because of the aftermath of World War II. And then when the Cold War ended and the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, a debate began. Should we join the European Union or not? The answer to it was yes. And we didn't join the EU for economic reasons. We joined it for security reasons. That was the philosophy of trying to integrate into Western institutions as much as you can. But the time wasn't right to join NATO. Unfortunately, I was, one of the few that supported Finnish NATO membership. So therefore, a decision was taken by our military authorities, actually, which I think, with the wisdom of hindsight, was brilliant, to say, let's integrate as closely as possible to the American defense industry and American defense, that when push comes to shove, were we to have to join NATO, we would be more NATO compatible than the NATO member states themselves. So we bought F-18s. And then a decision was made in 2020, early 2020s, late 2010s, that we needed to modernize our air defense. And then, of course, the military made its assessment, political decision makers made their assessment, and ended up with the F-35s, considered to be the best on the market. And I think even with the wisdom of hindsight, the decision was correct. Because on top of that, if you look at our long-range missiles, air, land, and sea, if you look at a lot of the defense components that we have right now, many of them are linked to the American system. Now you might come back and say, okay, is there a kill switch? You know, what are the Americans going to do? Do you rely on them? Again, I come back to the notion that it's very much in the self-interest of the United States to make sure that Finland takes care of its backyard right there next to the Koala Peninsula. So I think the decision was correct. But now, of course, again, we have to understand that things like air defense are changing. We're looking at what Ukraine is doing, right? With drones, with missiles. So we're going to have to, I think, diversify even more than we expected. And the final point, which I should have said earlier, that Ukraine is not only doing better on the battlefield, and in that sense, you know, not losing the war, but I think we're coming to a point where Europe, the West, the United States, the Gulf states, they need Ukraine more than Ukraine needs us. And that's good to keep in mind.
Yeah. Maybe before we turn things over to our audience, I know there are people who want to ask questions. You've written so eloquently, it's part of the new lexicon of international relations, values-based realism that our president referred to. And while we're all focused on transatlantic relations and war in Ukraine and the challenges in the Gulf, we tend to forget that the majority of the world takes the view that's not our fight. And there are many serious challenges that many countries in the global south are now dealing with. And it's also the case, you mentioned international institutions, that international institutions in terms of their decision-making structure, if you look at the Bretton Woods institutions, the composition of the Security Council, do not reflect the kind of world that we're in. How do we, as we being the middle powers, engage in a much more systematic way with the global south? What are the issue areas, in your opinion, that we should be focused on? And when it comes to institutional reform, where would you like to see a core coalition of countries leading that reform process? You know, right now it's all about us, but we mustn't forget that we live on a planet where most of the world's citizens are not focused on what we're worried about right now.
Yeah, I guess you're kind of asking the thesis of my book. And for those of you who haven't read it or gone to ChatGPT to get a summary, the basic idea is that I tried to propose two instruments of foreign policy, neither of which are doctrine. One is called values-based realism, and that combined with something I call dignified foreign policy. And values-based realism is the idea that you stay true to your values, understanding that in foreign policy you make a value judgment every day. Do you give development aid to a country where homosexuality is a crime? Do you buy weapons from a country which is in a war which you don't approve of? So you have to do it. But when you stay true to those values, which we could call them Finnish-Canadian values if you want, you have to be a realist in the sense that you cannot solve all of the world's problems with like-minded countries only. I mean, otherwise we'd have sort of Finnish-Canadian world dominance, right?
Actually, Canadians would just be talking to themselves.
Yeah, which wouldn't be necessarily a bad world, but you know, it's not a realistic world. So you don't solve the climate crisis just with Finland and Canada and Europe taking measures that reduce CO2 emissions or the temperature of the globe. You don't solve technology and artificial intelligence just by dealing with people who believe in the exact same algorithms. You don't solve conflicts with like-minded countries only, because conflicts are essentially the final state of disagreement. So that's the sort of instrument that I give. And then you ask the question, okay, how do we solve this? And so Mark talks about there being a rupture in the world order. I talk about there being a transition. And we're trying, the two of us, to merge these two ideas now. And then Mark talks about the middle powers taking over. And I talk about the middle powers be given agency in international institutions such as the United Nations. And in the triangle of power, which is global West, which wants to preserve the multilateral order, cooperation, norms and rules and institutions, and a multipolar world, which is more conflictual, transactional, and nation-state based, I want to tilt it towards multilateral. And in order for us to do that, we need to reach out to the global South, because they didn't have agency when World War II ended and the liberal world order was created some 80 years ago. And in order for us to preserve the system, they need to have power in it. And that's what we're trying to work with. But I think now, if you look at the behavior of Russia in Ukraine, you look at, to put it diplomatically, the transition in American foreign policy, it seems to me that there are incentives for the rest of the world to unite around multilateralism, and hopefully that will happen. It'll take a few years, I think, for the new order to emerge, but I'm quite hopeful that with people like Mark Carney and countries like Canada, we can do this.
Great. Well, we're now going to turn things over to our audience. There are two microphones. There's one there. Where's the other one?
Just one, Fen.
Oh, just one. So if you can line up, I see some of my students there.
I'm in trouble.
And
Hello?
I have to warn you all now, we have a very hard stop at 9 o'clock. So please keep your questions.
It's not that hard of a. It is a hard stop? No. Okay. No, I'm just going to business meetings, so we're good.
Well, good morning,
say who you are, please, and obviously don't direct your questions to me, but to President Stubb.
Good morning, Mr. President. My name is Riley. I am a second-year student about to graduate, if the marking goes well. So please consider being kind to us, Professor. In our NPSIA debate club that we have with former ambassadors, including former Ambassador Mark Fletcher and Peter MacArthur, we recently had a very heated discussion of universalism versus relativism. So as you speak about this shift between world orders, how do you foresee this debate between universalism and realism shifting, given that in China and in the global South, they do not necessarily share the same traditional philosophical and political background that we do? Thank you.
Okay, it's a super good question. I look at a lot of people in line, so I'm going to be very telegraphic. I think my answer is values-based realism. So the universalism comes from the ideas that there are universal values, but the problem is that some countries don't see them as universal values, they see them as Western values. So what we now need to try to convince is to say that these are innate human values, fundamental rights, human rights, freedom, and then we come to institutional things such as the rule of law, norms and laws. But in order for them to pertain so that we don't become just realists or even relativists, we need to change the power structure of the institutions that sort of give a context to that rule. So again, for me, it's not black and white, it's not binary, it's kind of both. You need the values and you need the realism.
Perfect,
Thank you.
And Professor Hampson, please be kind to us with marking.
Thanks.
Angelina, I'm a student here at NPSIA. Thank you so much for taking the time today. As someone with family in Ukraine, I appreciate your comments on the war. I'm curious your thoughts on the results of the recent Hungarian election. I know you alluded to them. And what those results maybe signal for European unity and particularly for further support for Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you. On Ukraine, we have been steadfast supporters from the beginning. We'll continue to do that. I last spoke to Zelensky on Sunday. We speak 2-3 times a week and try to find good solutions. On the elections in Hungary, obviously I don't want to put it this way, the track record of people meddling in the politics of another country doesn't seem very good, so I won't do that either. But you know, for us international liberals, of course, there's a sigh of relief in it all. I have to admit that. If you look at the behavior of Viktor Orban over the years, whether it's on Ukraine, whether it's on rule of law, whether it's on press freedom, whether it's on legal institutions, they didn't exactly go hand in hand with what I believe to be European values. And democracy, especially liberal, not illiberal democracy, has spoken in Hungary, and now we'll see how things go on from there. But I would be lying if I didn't say that I've been smiling for the past 48 hours. And my team is going to kill me.
Yes, sir.
Hi, sir. Bill White from the U.S. Coast Guard. The ICE Pact has been a smashing success with 4 U.S. icebreakers on contract with Finnish shipyards and
Finnish-Canadian shipyards.
of course, and a Canadian icebreaker under construction in Helsinki right now. Where does the agreement go from here? Is there room for growth?
Okay, again, just a little bit as anecdotal evidence to show you how adamant President Trump was about this. So Canada has 18 icebreakers, Finland has 8 icebreakers, Russia has 40 icebreakers. The US and the Coast Guard has kind of one, and it's, if I may, quite dysfunctional. So when we started the negotiations, the first conversation I had with President Trump, just after he had been elected, he went on for 15 minutes about icebreakers. And as the process went around, his civil servants were telling Mr. President, we need 2 icebreakers, we can't, and perhaps we can buy a used one. So President Trump calls with his team in the middle of the night to me and says, Alex, I want 11 icebreakers. Okay, fine by me. Hold on, I'll go to the shipyards and fix it. So, we made what we would probably call a Finnish-Canadian model, where, the original icebreakers will be built in Finland and partially in Canada, and then some of the technology will be transferred also to Americans. I think it's a raving success. It was a complex process, but I think some corners were cut in a good kind of a way, and now the Coast Guard is going to have a few of these cutters, which I think will be very useful also for your capacity to project power in the Arctic.
Good morning, my name is Luca. I'm a 4th-year student here at Carleton University, and you speak of multilateralism and the change in the global order. A poll I have here from Nanos Research shows that 57% of Canadians now, which is an unbelievably high level, probably the highest I think we will ever see, support or somewhat support Canada joining the European Union. So, in your opinion, even though we are not on the same continent and we're an ocean away, what benefits could that bring if we were to make the decision to join?
And we do have a border with Europe on Hans Island.
I'm glad my team is not looking at me so I can answer whatever I want. They're just faffing with their phones. Okay, so I can't give you a definitive answer because I don't think that would be proper. And on top of that, I should add that I do foreign policy. The Prime Minister does the EU. But I am an EU nerd. I mean, that's kind of how I got started at Furman University in Greenville, South Carolina, some, almost 30 years ago. And I did write my PhD on flexible integration, that not everyone has to do everything at the same time. I think we're at one of those hinge moments right now when it comes to multilateral cooperation, where limits should be provided only by our brains. So I look at a country like Canada, which would slot into the European Union in negotiations that would be faster than Finland joining NATO. So if there would be willingness on the part of Canada to join the European Union, and if then that was reciprocated by the European Union, then I think it would be a marriage made in heaven. But I think a lot will have to take place in between. Having said all of that, if there was ever a time for Europeans and Canadians to talk about it, or as you say, about it, then the time would be right now. But whether it'll take place or not, I don't know. If that were to happen, I'd be waving the Canadian flag and adding a maple to the stars of the Union.
Thanks so much.
Well, you might want to encourage the 10 countries that still haven't ratified our trade agreement with Europe to do so.
I'm sure Finland is not one of them.
Yes.
Hi there, my name is Darina Baikova. I was born and raised in Karowe, Russia, and now I'm studying law and international affairs here.
Karelia.
Karowe. Yeah.
Okay, as my dad was
I've been-
born there as well. Yeah,
I've
in
been there
Kakisalmi.
many times. My mother is Karowean indigenous.
Okay.
Recently, a lot of political refugees from Russia have been having trouble finding asylum in Europe and now in Canada with the bill C-12. What steps is Europe, and specifically Finland, is going to take to protect the political refugees from Russia and other authoritarian regimes?
Yeah, it's a good question, and at the same time a super difficult question, because the knee-jerk reaction that we all have is that everything coming from Russia is bad, therefore, let's stop it. And of course, this is far from the truth. There's a massive population that does not support the regime, etc., etc. A lot of these asylum type of decisions are obviously national decisions, so it depends completely on the country in question on how they go through these different parts. Then, of course, you see a lot of actually, Russian refugees in the Gulf states, interestingly enough. So I can't give you a direct answer because every one of these goes case by case. The only answer I have is let's hope the war ends as soon as possible, because that would then alleviate the pain.
Yes, sir.
Good morning, Mr. President. My name is Nick. I'm a student studying both political science and economics, and my research currently is at the intersection of sovereign finance and Arctic security. And I'm also a fellow triathlete. I'm going to be competing next year in 2027, so I'll try to keep this to a sprint rather than a marathon.
Very good.
I have two questions. The first, regarding your discussions with Prime Minister Carney this week, do you believe Arctic sovereignty still rests exclusively on ships and soldiers, or is there perhaps a transition occurring toward a new kind of power, one defined by who controls the emerging financial digital systems and natural resource supply chains? Secondly, Henry Kissinger famously said that leaders tend to consume the intellectual capital they built before taking office. So looking back on your time spent in government and academia, what is the one lesson you return to as you try to pull together this fragmented world?
Okay, good. I'll try to take the second question first. I hope that idea did not pertain to Henry Kissinger himself, because that would have been a waste of a few decades of intellectual power and foreign policy. What I found with myself is that if I don't do the academic reading and thinking and creating the frameworks, I'm not able to probably perform as well as I would want to as a president of Finland. So for me, it was super helpful to basically leave politics in 2016, go back to academia and actually banking, and then write that book. And I still try to keep up that rhythm. So, I try to read either memos, papers, articles, or books for about 2 hours a day. And that sort of feeds my brain. And I feel that the brain is like a hard drive. So stuff goes in there. And then, of course, when you read a book, you forget it. But I take a lot of notes and then sort of it stacks up at one way or another. So I try to use a lot of those lessons, and especially when the world is changing. Like if I wasn't reading foreign affairs, I think it would be very difficult to contextualize what I do. So I try to keep up to that, and hopefully it works. On the Arctic, I don't see the linkage. I see through your studies the linkage that you're looking for between, digital currencies and the Arctic, but I'd have to treat them separately. The Arctic, interestingly enough, we had an Arctic Council with 8 countries, including Russia, which is now dysfunctional, but we have 7 countries in NATO that are Arctic nations. And it's always about 3 things. It's about security, it's about the environment and climate, and now also about the economy because of opening waterways. And I think we need to treat it as an extremely important geopolitical entity in this time. And I think it's very important that we, the middle powers, of course then including the United States, take ownership of it and make sure that these 3 things stay intact. Of course, the Greenland issue has complicated things a little bit.
Thank you. Next one.
Good morning, President.
And try to keep your question short, please.
My name is Dren, and I'm a second-year NPSIA student here. Thank you so much for visiting us. It's an honor to have you. As Finland is used to having an aggressive, larger neighbor, what lessons can Canada learn from Finland, especially as the Arctic opens up?
Okay, I can just see the headline. You know? So, there was a question, not the answer. No, I think very different cases, obviously. You know, Russia has traditionally been an imperial power. It lives on expansion. It did so ever since Ivan the Terrible, all the way up through actually Lenin, Stalin, and the Soviet regime, and now again with Putin. Russia's, in my mind, DNA as an empire is based on Ruski Mir, Greater Russia, which is you know, one language, one religion, and one leader. They believe that might is right. That's why they had 15 Soviet satellites in the Russian Empire. That's why they attack Ukraine. That's why they threaten Central Asia and cause havoc. And I think the American DNA is fundamentally different. Obviously goes through rough patches, but it is still a constitutional liberal democracy with checks and balances of power. It does project global power right now in a different way than it has done for the past 80 years. How long that will last, we don't know. But I think Canada is doing all the right things, to a certain extent, hedging and creating relationships with India, with China, with the European Union, and with superpowers like Finland. But at the same time, you know, maintaining a relationship with the United States. It's a very difficult time right now, but I think you guys are doing all the right things, and I can't give you any major lessons on how to deal with it, because, you know, dealing with the Soviet Union and or Russia is completely different from dealing with the United States.
Thank you, President Stu. And just to follow
no
up,
more. I'm afraid I'm going to have to turn to the
it
next
could also
person.
be Russia.
Okay.
Hi, Yusuf. My name is Yusuf. I'm finishing my final semester of political science at the University of Ottawa. My question has a bit of history to it, so I think I'm addressing it to the right person. But given Finland's history, right, during the Winter War, Finland stood alone. During the Continuation War, Finland picked a side. I believe for pragmatic reasons, and so
that would be the Germans.
Yeah, don't want to shame anyone, but my question to you is, given that history during the Second World War and then during the Cold War, you know, I'm surprised to see sometimes that Finland has Soviet equipment, for example. What characterizes the leader of this pragmatic and values-based era?
Okay, so it's a very good question. By the way, if you want to read a novel, fact-based novel on the Winter War, read a book called The Winter Warriors by Olivier Norek. Et si vous êtes français,
Wow.
c'est écrit enfin en français parce qu'il est français lui.
Pas de souci.
And really, you know, worth the read. But I'll dissect the answer to say that during the Cold War, I felt that Finland's foreign policy was pragmatic realism. So be pragmatic, live with the fact that you're next to the Soviet Union, therefore do compromises on your sovereignty, even if the Soviets were meddling in our internal affairs. But we were not a communist satellite by definition, we're still a democracy. After the Cold War, we reverted very quickly to values-based idealism. You know, end of history thesis, Fukuyama, we're all going to go become liberal democracies, social market economies, and globalists. There'll be love, peace, rainbows, and green fields we'll live happily ever after. And right now, we define our foreign policy as values-based realism. So stick to those values, but be realistic about what Russia can do, and this is the balance that we're finding. And as I said, values-based realism for me is not a doctrine, it's an instrument to carry us over this change in the world order, and then we'll have something else in a few years.
Thank you very much.
I'm just looking at the numbers here. Maybe if we take 2 or 3 questions. And
I think we're okay time-wise, because milloin me pitää lähteä?
5 minutes more?
5
Okay.
only?
Yeah. Okay.
You know what the difference is between protocol and a terrorist? You can negotiate with a terrorist.
So I'd like Blair, after you've asked your question, keep it short. I'd like to go to the end of the line, and maybe Ben,
We'll do it. Yeah, sure.
you could ask your question, and then we'll take 2 more from NPSIA students, and I'm afraid we'll have to cut it off there. My apologies.
So first off, thank you, sir, for coming. I'm a Royal Military College graduate, as a current second year student at Paterson School of National Affairs. Also, some assistant in Operation Unifer. I appreciate your comments on Ukraine. The Ukrainians are definitely doing a hell of a job in that war. My question to you is, do you see us expanding our centers of excellence in regards to Finnish and Canadian cooperation for the Grey War aspect and non-kinetic element to ensure maximization of forces beyond traditionally expensive kinetic elements in our militaries?
I'll try to be very telegraphic in my answers. I think we need to coordinate, we need to find synergies, we need to work together because we have common security, not least in the Arctic.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Hi, my name is Olivia. I'm a student here at NPSIA. I study peace and conflict analysis as well as development. I just wanted to give note to Finland's presence in the peace-building space and your role in the conflict management initiative, and ask you what you think conflict resolution looks like in the wake of this transition between world orders and the erosion of the international institutions that a lot of mediation and dialogue depends on, especially as emphasized by CMI. So
Yeah,
thank you very much.
so for those of you who don't know, former President Martti Ahtisaari, now late, received the Nobel Peace Prize in 2008 for his peace mediation on 3 continents, in Namibia, in Kosovo, and then in Aceh, in Indonesia. And I had the honor of chairing his Peace Foundation, CMI, for 6 years after he took a sidestep. So we have a long tradition of mediation. My second answer is the problem with mediation today is that it's transactional. Previously, you used to nominate a mediator, usually through the UN system, and that person would try to find a peace agreement which both parties or more parties would agree to and implement. Now it's all transactional, as we can see in Gaza, as we can see in Iran, as we can see in Sudan. And this is a space that needs to be filled, because I very rarely think that peace sticks if there is not an international institution. And I've been reminded of this because I just read U Thant's memoirs, who was, I think, the 3rd or the 4th UN Secretary General. And I'm right now reading Kofi Annan's memoirs, where I'm reminded of all the conflicts that took place there and the engagement of the UN. So my message is bring the UN back.
That's a really important message. If you could let Ben come up to the mic. Or take the mic to Ben.
Kiitos, että tuli tänään, Mr. President.
Kiitos.
My question is to do with deterrence. Do you think the current NATO architecture of deterrence is effective, and are there specific changes at the political level that need to be made, such as the ability to respond without direct approval if there's a time lag in a Russian attack?
Yeah.
And if you don't want to answer that, you can talk about deterrence generally. Thank you.
Thanks. First of all, if you heard, what was it? He said the word kiitos. Kiitos means thank you. And I'll give you a memory bank. Think about mosquitoes. And just drop the moss, and now you'll know forever what thank you is. On deterrence, I think it usually has 2 legs. One is communication and strategic communication. And if you look at what we see right now, talked about NATO and deterrence, I am worried. Or put it the other way around, Moscow is quite happy. So we have to be very careful on that. The other one is then the reality of deterrence. I think there we're quite good. The way in which we think about it in Finland is that first we have national deterrence. That's why we have one of the biggest armed forces in Europe together with Poland, Ukraine and Turkey. Secondly, we think about regional deterrence. And now that Sweden is in NATO as well, and then Norway, we feel quite comfortable about the synergies that we have there. And then after that, we think about regional deterrence, which of course is the European Union, the Nordics, and the fact that in NATO we're in Norfolk. And then finally we think about the deterrence that we get from our allies through Article 5. Do we need to have quicker mechanisms? I'm sure if that thing hits the fan, we will have quick enough reaction. I felt we had it on hybrid attacks on our cables in the Baltic Sea. The Baltic Sentry was created very quickly. When there were some issues in the Arctic Sentry was created quite quickly. And then when there were issues with drones and airspace violations, Eastern Sentry was created. So I'm quite comfortable with the way in which NATO works right now, in practical terms.
And I'll take two more, and then I'm afraid that's it.
Thank you very much for your time. I'm Kurt, also an NPSIA student. I agree with your analysis that in the long term, Ukraine would benefit from joining both NATO and the EU, but in the short term, before they have any formal security guarantees, do you think that Russia can credibly commit to a peace agreement, especially with their use of hybrid warfare?
First of all, I think the most credible security guarantee that Ukraine has right now is 800,000 strong armed force and a capacity to conduct modern warfare unlike any other NATO member states. So I think the tide has actually turned. I think we Europeans have to understand that we need Ukraine more than Ukraine needs us. They know how to do this thing. Then the question is on the peace agreement. I just don't see Putin changing his mind. I was optimistic for a few months and working at it, but it ended up being classical Russian delay tactics. So we have three base cases, scenarios that we're working on this year. One is that the war continues, two is that there's a peace agreement, or three is that one side or the other weakens. And I'm afraid scenario one is the one that we have to work with, and unfortunately start preparing for the next winter for Ukraine as well.
Mike, you get to ask the last question.
Kiitos, Mr. President, for joining us. Yeah, I was going to do it, but now I look like I'm just following suit. And it's my birthday, so I'm glad I get the last question.
Happy birthday. Okay, hyvää syntymäpäivää.
So it's kind of a two-parter, but given that Finland has fundamentally recalibrated its approach to bilateral engagement with Russia since 2022, how do you assess allies who haven't made that same shift? And I don't mean morally, I mean strategically. Does NATO cohesion require narrative alignment, or can the institution tolerate members who maintain separate bilateral channels with Moscow?
Okay, first let me push back a little bit about your assumption that we changed this in 2022. I think we changed it in 1991 when the Soviet Union collapsed. I always made it clear as a strong advocate of Finland in the West that we had chosen our hockey team, that we are on the side of Western values in Europe, not on the Russian side. But we still had this balance. And then probably what your question then insinuates is, can we tolerate countries like Hungary? It's very complicated. It's very, very difficult to do that. And that's, the reason that I think most of Europe and most of the alliance, at least 31 countries, are quite happy that there was a change of regime in Hungary. But as I said, I just finish off with this, that foreign policy is never static. You have to navigate in difficult circumstances, and especially right now, it's super complicated. And this kind of leads me to my final point to all the students here. Like when I started studying in the US in 1989, in the fall of 1989, and you remember the Berlin Wall came down, and we were probably studying at the same time.
No, I was about 15 years before you.
Okay, I never believed that, man. But then there was this sort of element of hope and sort of, you know, end of history, and, you know, we've got this type of mentality. And now when you are finishing your studies, listening to you, whether you're second, third, or fourth year students, you're entering a completely different world. But that doesn't mean that you don't have agency in this world. So, you know, you have to think that you have an impact, you know, whether it's through academia, civil service, tech, or whatever it could be. So don't sort of, you know, give up hope. I was very lucky to be born into that era of, you know, we become EU members, we integrate, and everything is going fine. You're coming into a much colder world. But I think my sort of optimistic view of human nature is that we have a tendency to solve extremely complex problems, and we will solve this as well. So have faith in whatever you do after your studies, and continue on the path, because at the end of the day, this world is going to be a much better place tomorrow than what it was today.
I'll try to be as quick as I can be. I know we are pressed for time, so let me thank a number of people without whom today's event would not have been possible. Ambassador Korteniemi and your team, thank you very much. The team at Global Affairs Canada, and of course Carleton University colleagues from the Faculty of Public and Global Affairs, Department of University Communications, Conference Services, and Campus Safety Services. Thank you to Professor Fen Hampson for guiding today's conversation, and a special thank you to my assistant, Anne Morneau, who's somewhere, she's at the back, for her tireless efforts in coordinating everything. And thank you very much, Mr. President, for such an engaging conversation this morning. It has been an absolute honor and a privilege to host you at Carleton University. Please join me in giving them a round of applause again. And finally, I want to thank you all for your participation and insightful questions. For security reasons, please remain seated for a couple of minutes until we exit the room. Thank you.
I feel much more secure now.